So turning a corner here, the focus of the Monterey Public Utility District's Aquatic Plant Management Plan is on non-herbicide techniques. We've got several water systems that pull directly from the river. And so even though herbicides don't affect those much, just the fewer chemicals we put out in the water for those water systems, the easier it is on our filtration systems. And, just less chemicals is better. So we have developed this workshop in coordination with the county in part to fulfill part of our license to operate the dam. And the focus of that, like I said, is to try to provide landowners techniques, tools. We've got a small grant program that they mentioned earlier that runs through the weed board to help get those tools into the hands of landowners, but mostly to just make sure that you guys have a chance to ask questions, look at the tools that are out there, play with them if you want to, and that we can pass on whatever tools and techniques and opportunities that we've come across from year to year. So there'll be a lot of repeat from previous years, but I think I have a couple new things that are in here. So you're going to get, got to figure out how to move forward. I'm going to go through plant identification. You got a little bit of that last time, so I'm going to just skim across some of it that's already been mentioned, and then we've got a little presentation outside that we'll hit later that we can do a show and tell and pull up the different weeds that we've been talking about. You can get your hands on them so you know what you're looking at when you look out onto your shoreline. I want to go through the benefits of having certain kinds of native vegetation on your shoreline, and then go over the tools that I've come across in the past couple of years that you might be interested in using. All right, seaweed, milfoil, and other green slimy stuff. I've got it broke down, or I like to break it down into native versus non-native. We like to get rid of the exotic or the noxious weeds wherever we can find them. But some of the native plants, if you've got, say, 100 feet of shoreline, and you really only use 30 feet of it on a regular basis, there's a lot of benefits for having native plants occupy the rest of the space. So I'll go over some of those plants, what they look like, and what some of their benefits are. So of the noxious weeds that we like to persecute, we've got Eurasian water milfoil, curly leaf pond reed, flowering rush, and yellow flag iris. And the last two, the flowering rush and the yellow flag iris, I like to call them semi-aquatic. I'm not aquatic botanist, so I use wrong terms all the time, but mostly they grow at or slightly above the shoreline on our river. But we throw them in here because they're very important to control, since they're terraforming plants. And when I say terraforming, I mean, if they come in and occupy a bay like Ashenfelter Bay, for instance, within years, 10 years to 20 years, they could fill that bay completely and it would no longer be a bay. So it's important to keep your eyes open for the flowering rush and the yellow flag iris. There's some other problems, but I'll go through that when I hit them. So the first one, we've heard a lot about it today, but this is what Eurasian water milfoil looks like out on our river. It's got pink, greenish to pink stem. Sometimes it's a nasty, ugly red. It's got when it actually emerges, it's got a ugly little red flower that pops out at the top. It's got feather-like leaves on it that come out in whorls around each of the nodes on the stem as it comes up. And when it's young and developing, it's got a white root, but when it's well established, it'll be an almost jet black root when you're ripping them out. So you know what you're getting when you're pulling it out of the water. And we talked about in the last presentation about how, for years people said, oh, I got horrible milfoil problems, and we'd go out and we'd look at their shoreline and realize that they didn't have any milfoil at all. So I've got these next series of pictures in there to just kind of show you, I hope it's showing up, what it looks like. So I estimate this is about a 10% milfoil population in this dense bed of what's mostly Elodea and pondweed. And even though it looks like it's completely covered off with milfoil, when we did the count on this, it was only about 50% milfoil. And that's what 100% milfoil looks like. If you've never been out in some of our tighter bays, you'll see this sometimes. You just run over it and it's nothing but milfoil. I'd like to talk about some of the lookalikes. So each of our species have some native comparable species out there that often are confused for milfoil. So you'll see the milfoil in the lower left-hand picture there with the red stem. And the other two photos are different pictures of coontail. So it's a really fibrous plant, and you can touch it when we get outside, but it's got a lot of benefits for fish habitat. It's very fibrous plant. So later in the year, when all of the other vegetation dies back in the fall, it'll stay up like a little Christmas tree under the water, and the juvenile fish get a lot of benefit out of it. Another prominent water plant we have out here is Elodea, just common waterweed. And if you have a monoculture of it, it looks like there's shag carpeting going all over the ground because it grow up. Most of the time, it doesn't top out in the water column like the other ones, so you can drive your boats over it. If somebody's going to try to encourage a plant to develop that's native, that has a low impact on their property, I encourage them to try to enhance the Elodea because it can cover it, and like having a nice healthy lawn, the weeds can't come in if they can't get down there and seed. Water buttercup. This one threw me when I first started doing aquatic veg surveys about 15 years ago now. We had high milfoil counts everywhere, and I was trying to figure out why. Well, it's because I didn't know what water buttercup was, and I was counting it all as milfoil. So you'll come into some shorelines and you think you've got a solid milfoil bed, and when it flowers, it's got these little white and yellow flowers on them, and that's water buttercup. But and I've got some samples to show you out here, but you can tell the difference when you pull it out and take a good look at it. The leaves are more pom-pom shaped than they are feather shaped, and they come off of one side or the other of the stem instead of coming out in a ring around the nodes on the stem. The other noxious weed that they covered in great detail, so I'll skip through it pretty fast, is the curly pondweed. For me, when I'm doing identifications on that and trying to tell it from native pondweed, is obviously if you're seeing the chirons, the little things that when you're walking along your shoreline, you step on them and they hurt because they're like the core of a pine cone, and they've got these little jagged, serrated edges on it. That's a perfect telltale sign that you've got a bad curly leaf pondweed infection. But the plant itself is crinkly. It's got a weird fibrous texture to it, and each of the little leaves has a serrated edge on it when you get a good close look at it. So it's pretty easy to tell. Here's some of its lookalikes. We've got several different kind of Potamogeton that was covered in the last presentation, and some of them look almost identical to curly leaf pondweed, but they don't have that serrated edge, and they don't have the scrub brush Brillo pad texture to them. We got a lot of different pondweeds out there. A lot of times, I just call them native pondweed, but the one with the broad leaf over here, before it actually tops out and produces the surface leaf, a lot of people call it eelgrass or seagrass because it's just long, sometimes 20, 25 feet long vegetation coming up from the deep, and it's good habitat for a lot of different kind of aquatic animals, but it can be a severe nuisance when you're trying to get into your dock as well. Flowering rush. This is our newest nasty on the river. Unfortunately, it's got a very pretty flower, and I've actually found one to show you out here this year. Most of the time when we have a workshop, they're either haven't bloomed or they're done blooming, but I actually found one this year. So this is one of those terraforming plants that we try to control. It spreads, well, I won't get to that quite yet. So you can identify it if you see it. It looks a little bit like our other rush plants, but the the leaves, not the flowering stem, but the leaves have almost a perfectly triangular cross section when you snip them off or break them in half. It's got a really strong tuber-shaped rhizome underneath that produces little white buds. You can see, do I have a pointer, mouse? Oh, there it is. I got it up there. So these little buds almost look like chunks of garlic pop off the roots. And when waterfowl love to eat this stuff. So when they're in there mucking around, they pop those loose and they float down and they plant themselves somewhere else. Also, each of the little tiny root hairs can start a new plant. It's got, not using the right term, but not seeds, because the seeds aren't viable in our populations, but has fruiting bodies that pop out of the flower head that can also seed downstream. It's really difficult to keep it from spreading. Here's a picture of some of the fruiting bodies down there, the buds and the root hairs, and this is, oops, what the rhizome looks like. That's really, this is after the plants died back, but you can see the new growth popping out along that rhizome in several different spots. Unfortunately, it doesn't have to top out. Even it's, I called it a semi-aquatic, but it can be completely aquatic. You can never get it up to the surface or flower. In the surveys that Seattle did in the Boundary Dam pool, they found a huge population of this, about 15 foot under the water, and hundreds of feet of it. So it doesn't have to top out. When it doesn't top out, it has this sickly look to it. It doesn't show up in the picture quite as red-brown as it does, but when it emerges, the leaves get a lot more stiff so they can stand up in wind. But when it hasn't emerged yet, they're a lot more flaccid and they just kind of flow with the current. A lookalike is not a very similar when they're both mature plants, but when they're young, the duck potato, which I've got a sample of out there, has a pretty solid root mass to go along with it. But the cross section of the stem is somewhat triangular shaped at certain times of the development. It looks a little bit more horseshoe shaped, but you can mistake it. Once it leaves out, the leaves have an arrowhead shape to the leaf on the duck potato that is nothing like a flowering rush. But when they're juvenile, you can mistake them. Here's yellow flag iris. This is a problem for two reasons. It's terraforming, so it can build bays like the one you see on the left there. But it also can become buoyant when it's a big, heavy mass like this. The tubers that grow under the sediment can produce gas, and they can actually float huge rafts of your shoreline away and go down to reinfect someplace else. But the problem it can cause to you if you have a big mass of this is now you have an erosion point that you have to deal with because it's just taken a chunk of your property out. The seed pods look like a row of corn. It's kind of interesting. First guy that showed me that said, yeah, you can eat them. Well, you can, but they taste horrible, so don't. It's not food. Oh, and the tubers, when you cut through, if you try to pull up a sample of this, you'll know how firm the tubers are, but it's like chopping through wood down there. Looks like a sweet potato. I suppose, now that I think about it, it's got the texture of a sweet potato, but they have that bright orange core to the flesh of the tuber there. So as was mentioned in the last presentation, we've got a lot of different native plants out there. And if you were going to go treat with whatever means your shoreline, it's helpful to know what you've got out there. That's why we spent a little time today going over plant ID. But, you know, so far we've got primarily two aquatic nasty plants out there and 4 total that you're going to be possibly dealing with on your shoreline, and a whole bunch of native vegetation out there. So yeah, you can't expect to go treat milfoil and have a clean shoreline. So just have that in mind when you're deciding how you want to approach aquatic veg management. All right, just briefly, the benefits of maintaining healthy aquatic plant population along your shoreline. Talked about fish habitat already, but if you've got erosion problems as well, that's why I encourage people to only treat what they want to use on a regular basis. Because if you have a fairly dense aquatic vegetation upstream and down from where you're at, it can buffer boat wakes. It really reduces the wave action that's actually hitting your shoreline because it does like a sponge. It just sucks that stuff in. It binds the nutrients. So if the plants, regardless of what they are, native, non-native, grab those nutrients, suck it in, we have fewer algae blooms out in our river because it's bound up in the aquatic veg that falls back in the fall. When we don't have to worry about algae blooms, those nutrients are released and it flows back downstream in the spring runoff, and it's not there the following year. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then, of course, there's juvenile fish rearing. So if you have a barren shoreline, the juvenile fish hide in that, even when it's fallen back in the fall, the muck down there. If you run an electroshocker, I'm a fish biologist, so I don't catch fish with poles anymore. But if you run a electroshocker over top of it, it'll look like there's not a fish anywhere. And if you're on a sandy piece of riverbed, that's true. But if you go over even fallen down vegetation, the bottom just comes alive with the fish that come out of there. You know, you have densities in the thousands per 100 feet, tens of thousands per 100 feet of the little juvenile fish. So that's why, you know, it's less work and less money, but only treat what you need to treat. All right, the next section I want to go over is just some of the tools that I've managed to acquire over the years and how I think that, or how other people have told me it's more beneficial to use them. So in general, we've got hand cutting tools, cutters and pullers. There's throwables, and then there's some with really long handles, so you don't have to sit there and throw all day. We've got different kinds of rakes, because anytime you're cutting vegetation off, so your neighbors don't hate you, you should try to rake up as much as possible, throw it in your garden. And then there's rollers and tillers. Both of those treat more of the lower parts of the plants. They get to the roots in a lot of cases, which give you a longer relief from the plants if you can cut them off and then till the roots up. And then I'll go over some combinations that have worked for other people. There's also power tools. There's power cutters, power rollers that you can mount to a dock or just put on a pedestal out on your shoreline to mechanically treat larger areas. And there's power rakes, and I'll go through some of what those look like. And then there's, of course, contracted services. You can have somebody come in and install ground barriers, custom pulling and diving, which is the dash that we talked about earlier. And then there's always the potential that we'll get custom harvesting. So we'll go out and look at these. I brought most of some of these tools, or most of some of the different types of tools out here to take a look at and get your hands on. But for all the folks online, I wanted to show the picture of it and go through it real briefly. So starting on the left here, you got several different kinds of rakes. This is just a regular old yard rake, but the guy that built it just took the head off of another rake, welded it to the backside, because no matter what you do, you throw it out there and 50% of the time it should land tying down, but 90% of the time it lands tying up. So this solves that problem. Later, I'll show you the Rakezilla that is a commercial version of this, way better, but this is really easy to do. And when they handed the program off to me, like I said, 15 years ago, this was the only tool that was anybody had anywhere. So it was really cool. It saved me a lot of throwing to get my samples. The rake with the red handle over here, this was the only aquatic plant management tool that I could find anywhere in the state of Washington when I took this over, because I was trying to build a tool base for this purpose right here, just to show people and use them myself, so I had some kind of an input to provide to people. But this is basically just a beach rake that you can also use to drag tools. It's got a handle eye at the end that you can tie a rope in and throw out, but pretty useless as a aquatic management tool. So I started looking outside the area, and apparently Michigan is where all aquatic vegetation is, because that's where all the plant management tools come from. Uh, I got almost all of mine from an online site called weedersdigest.com. He does a great video of every tool he has available, so you can see what you're getting. But there are other places that have some pretty unique tools as well. But, so this is two different actual useful rakes out here. The one on the left is Rakezilla. It's that double-sided one I was telling you about. And you can attach, like you see on the one on the right, you can attach floats to it, pool floats, kids floaties, whatever, so that after you cut your vegetation, most of it floats to the surface. You toss it out there and that'll keep it near the surface enough that it'll drag back. The big tooth rake, the one on the right, actually has a heavy piece of monofilament that threads through the end of each of the tines on the rake, so that if you have a big load, it doesn't flick out, and then separate your tines enough so it gets away. It's really kind of handy. You could add it to the Rakezilla as well, but I don't think it comes with it. As far as rakes go, this is the big daddy of all rakes. I haven't seen anybody deploy it yet, but it's super cool, and I want somebody to get one. So if you do, make sure you contact me and tell you. I think it would work fantastic in our system. You'd have to wait until this time of year when the flows went down quite a bit. But the way it works is the metal piece that you see on top of there, all of these massive rake tines. This is, I can't remember how wide, like 6 feet wide, and it sits on a barge. So you take a boat or something and pull it out past your weed bed and hold on to the barge, and then you've got a little. This is just a winch system, that gas-powered winch, so you stick into the shoreline. But you can pull it up with a four-wheeler, depending on what your access is on your shoreline. You can pull it up with anything. You cannot pull it up by hand. So you get the barge out there and you pull in with the winch, and this whole top rake portion plops off, falls down through the water column, and you pull it in, and it comes in just a massive table-sized pile of veg. It's if you want to get veg out, that's the way to do it. I've got another tool out here that I'll show you that works in a similar way. So on a little smaller basis, we're moving to tillers and pullers now. Well, I'm skipping ahead. So the one on the left is just a weed roller. It's got serrated blades on a little piece of PVC that's about 2 foot wide. It's got a really long handle. You push it back in and out. It's most effective after you've cut with some kind of a cutting tool. So you're not wrapping up the cutting blades with long veg. You're just getting into the roots. It serves two purposes. It pulls a lot more roots out than your normal cutters, but it also agitates the sediment. So the sediment is going out into the river and floating away, and there's less there to grow the next batch of weeds. On a larger scale, here's the lake tiller. These are 12-inch long tines that are hooked. And you pretty much, they show a picture of rolling a 2-footer around by hand, but there was no veg there, and it's a joke, you can't do it. I tried just like 4 feet in a heavily vegetated area, and it wraps up, and you can't pull it anywhere without a tractor. So we did use this effectively at my old boss's property, and just tied it onto the side of his little John boat, pulled it out, dropped it into the weed bed past his in the deep, pulled it in with his tractor, and by the time it came up, it was the size of both of those tables actually, and you couldn't see any part of the tool. That's how much vegetation it pulled up with. It's a little bit of a pain to get the veg off of it, but you have to have a tractor. I don't think we could have pulled it up with a four-wheeler. It was that heavy. But again, that was completely untreated shoreline with vegetation that was topped out. So if it's something that you're doing constant management on, that thing pulls roots. Other things don't. This is just a close-up of the weed roller. I wanted to put it in there for the folks online, just so they see what the blades were. There's two different kinds of blades, one that's designed to pull vegetation, one that's designed to cut. And repeat treatment, you get more and more as you go. This is a new thing, new last year. It's like the weed roller, but better. They recommend this like the weed roller to use in coordination with a cutter of some kind. Because like the one that I said you have to pull up with a tractor, it's going to wrap up a lot of vegetation if you've got tall veg. And but its primary purpose is it's going to disturb that really fine sediment. If you've got loose sediment in there and it's just regrowing everything, if you run this, you know, like a daily exercise in the morning on your high use area, that muck's going to go away. So I'm excited. I've got one out here to show you this year. I didn't have one last year when it came out, but I'm excited for somebody to try that. Now we've got some pullers that are throwables. Those were either tow behinds or they were long pole activated, so you know where you're going. There's a good time to use pullables or throwables, and there's a time not to. Anytime you don't know what's out there as far as obstructions, you don't want to use something like this because you're going to have to go dive for it to get it back. But this is very effective. I collected all my plants out there this year with this and just a couple throws. You basically toss this out as far as you can get it into your weed bed. You pull it up, but the teeth are offset, which you kind of see in this picture, and they grab onto the stems down in the base, and you pull quite a few, and then you cut off some more. But I prefer devices like the T-Weeder when I'm going out there because you get more of the roots when you're doing it, and you get a better long-term effect if you're doing it. It's also double-sided, so it doesn't matter which way you flop it, which I really like. This is a local company makes these. They're called the Weed Ray. It's basically two wood saw blades mounted on a 42-foot pole, really long pole. And they call it Weed Ray because it floats out over the vegetation when you push it on the pole with the saw blades pointed down. And then as you pull back, it pulls it down into the veg, and all of the joints are articulated so you can set the angle of the blades as you're pulling it back in so it doesn't dig into the sediment too much. And it just basically, it's a puller as well. Pulls until the teeth get full, and then it cuts. And you bring back a bunch of veg. And the flexible blades, when you get it pulled up, then you can flop it, and it flops off one side and then it flops off the other. So it's easier to get it off of this tool than it is some of the other ones. I've used this quite a bit and I really like it. Cutters, not a big fan of just cutters, but I do have a couple options out here. A lot of people really like the Y cutter. It's got really sharp razor blades basically on both sides. You toss it out there, you yard it in, and it's just going to cut it as close to the ground as it can get, depending on how dense your vegetation is. I don't like it because it doesn't get the roots all that often, and I'm not very efficient at throwing it right side up in the spot that I want it to go. So I'm not a big fan, but they do work really well if you can stick to it. And you just need to do it in coordination with a rake so you can get that vegetation back. The other cutter to the left there is long handle cutter. So you basically start on the edge of the bank and you work out instead of working your way in, and it cuts both on both edges, pulling and pushing. So you just kind of rub it like scrubbing the bottom of a pan. And it's serrated. You don't have to sharpen it. It handles gravelled. Shoreline's a little better, I think, than the razor option. All right, so power tools. Going to get into this really quick. We've got cutters, rollers, and rakes. So I don't have a demo to show you anymore because the guy that had one left. So unfortunately, I can't show you what this looks like, but there's two different versions of this boat-mounted harvester basically out there. You want to be very careful if you are actually interested in getting one of these. The way that our river grows vegetation and the way the water comes down in the spring and the veg is coming up, I like to have the option to go as deep as possible. So one of these has the option to add an extra length to it. You can add 4 extra feet to it. The other one does not. So pay attention to which one you're buying when you get it. I think otherwise they both work exactly the same. It's a little sickle bar cutter at the bottom of a troller motor mounted battery powered motor on the surface. You just drop it down on the side of your little boat. The one I used was mounted to a 12-foot John boat. Worked really well. and a 5-horse motor, and he just motored around and cleaned out his bay. Again, it just cuts, and so you have to collect it after you're done. But you can do a lot of work with it if you got a larger area that you're trying to clear out, or if you've let your veg get too out of hand and it's already topped out, it's a really good option because it just mows through it. Pivot mounted lake groomers or weed rollers. These are just long booms that attach to the bottom, and they roll on a pivot, and it just rolls back and forth all day long. It's powered, so you have to have the ability to get power out to your dock. But some run off of a motor that's mounted above, or some run off of a hydraulic pump that's basically just taking river water and pumping it through to drive the roller back and forth. So that has worked. If you have too steep of a bank, I think that you're going to be limited on the ability to treat, because it may not be able to make it back up your bank when it comes back around. The option that I think probably will work best for landowners on our river, just knowing what's out there in the river, is the power rakes. There's several different models of power rakes out there, but they just function with floating booms and dangling loops of chains all the way along the booms. And they just sit there and break up the vegetation until they get down to sediment. And then if you leave them there long enough, they stir up the sediment enough that the sediment goes away, and you're left with whatever you have under there. Sometimes it's gravel, sometimes it's boulders. But they also require power down to the shoreline. All right, that's it. Before we head out, I wanted to mention just a couple other things. So the folks that I've talked to that used only mechanical methods on their shoreline and were successful year after year, they most of them used a combination of a cutter and some kind of a roller or a tiller. So because like mowing your lawn the first time of the spring, you always wait too long. So the first time it's a grunter and you got a rake. But after that, if you keep on it, every week or so, it's like mowing your lawn. You go out there and you cut, or if you've got a good cut and you've got a good till on it with a weed roller or a muck roller, then you might just have to do it with the roller after that. So, but always be thinking of the combo, because just cutters alone, most people that I know of that have just done the cutters, they're not happy because it regrows too fast. And you don't get enough relief for your effort. So that's what I've learned from talking to folks that have done it in our river. Any questions? Yeah.
You're talking about native weeds or that are beneficial. Are there any bushes? I've got a lot of riverfront and suffering from wake boats that are just eroding my shore, plus animals that come up the bank and creating erosion and gophers and
muskrat burrows and all that fun stuff. But
I do have a lot of hawthorn growing that seems to be stabilizing part of that bank. And then there's some other plants I haven't identified yet, but they're long stalks, and even in the wintertime when it's all frozen, they get knocked down, but they sprout up extremely fast. And I see that they're growing not only in the sandy beach area, rocks and the gravel, but they even seem to really like the water when the river is up. I just haven't identified it, but are there species that you have identified that would be useful or plantable on?
So the good resources is the Weed Board and the Conservation District. They both have a lot of knowledge on where to plant which shrubs on our river, because some are more flood tolerant, some are less. But you can't go wrong with willow. There's several different species of native willow, which is probably the long stem thing that you're seeing come up. They lock in the sediment or the substrate really well. They're flood tolerant. There's the hawthorn are great, but they only go down so far. Serviceberry, red osier dogwood, those are all things that we've recommended folks plant along the riparian area. But pretty much anything that you're seeing grow there now, almost all of them you can take clippings from in the fall and plant them in. There's a way to soak them in the roots with like a vitamin B complex that encourages root, but I'm not real familiar with that. I just know it exists. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, there's definitely, there's also one of my favorites is cottonwood. Yeah. So we actually have a cottonwood program, grant program that will help purchase. And if you've got money left, it's not very much, like $500 per applicant, but it's available through the conservation district, and it'll pay for a mixed batch of plants that you put on your shoreline. And as long as you have cottonwood in that mix, then you're eligible for the full funding. But I like cottonwood because they sucker from spot to spot. And after they get, 15 feet high, you can limb them up. So you're really only dealing with the trunk. And they make fantastic eagle habitat down the road, which is one reason why we like to encourage them on La Pondere. But as far as the shoreline plant, they're fantastic. But all those lower growing shrubs, you can manage to a certain extent so they're not blocking a view as well. Good question. Anybody else? Yeah.
Seeing any trends along the Pondere River as far as climate and effect of maybe a late winter or early summer? Are you seeing anything?
Well, we've been looking for trends. I do an annual monitoring out there, just at index sites all the way up and down the river, and it's cyclic, mostly I think based on the duration of the flood. So I haven't got a real finite measure, but if we have long high floods, they don't have to peak like at 130,000, but if the flows stay above, say, 80,000 for 6 weeks or more, then we tend to have more native vegetation and less milfoil and curly leaf pondweed. And especially if it happens multiple years in a row. If it's just going back and forth and you don't really see much of a difference, it just stabilizes out there. I don't think I think we've got decades before we'll see any climate change based impacts to our river, because the peak temperatures in the river, which is what the plants care about, hasn't changed. And I don't think the average temperatures change very much either.
If I can, going back to what you were talking about with planting native willows and other things down there, will those be affected by some of the other herbicide treatments that are being proposed along,
these guys can answer that one probably a lot better than me, but I doubt it, just because, they're going to be treating late enough in the year that the flood will be down and the roots won't be exposed to.
Especially at certain times of the year, because it's obviously invested spending a lot of money to plant something.
Honestly, if it's on the shoreline, we're generally, unless we went up and sprayed it right on top of it, it's not going to hit. So unless we wanted to kill it, we would.
Yeah, I'm not real familiar with the commercial application restrictions, but I'm pretty sure that there's a window on the Pondere River that you cannot treat earlier than this, but maybe it's a temperature-based thing. You remember what those restrictions are? So that's one reason why we like to give as many mechanical options as we can, because certain times or certain flow years, it just is useless to treat chemically, because the high water stayed too long, temperatures weren't right for the application, because there's a lot of permit conditions that have to be met before applicators are even allowed to applicate or apply. Yeah. Is
there anything here that represents that big red and yellow machine that we see parked along the river? And I need to know, because it seems like when that machine does run, if somebody actually does run it at all, it just spits the weeds and they float down past and surround our dock in huge wrap. I'd like to give those back. Does that mean it's okay if as a homeowner we just release our weeds? Is that perfectly legal and ethical?
So I got a couple things. I am the guy that's partially responsible for the big machines. Yay! Yeah. So we've got a rotavator and a harvester, and the rotavator is basically an underwater rototiller. I think they're both red and yellow, but I'm not sure. One looks like it has a backhoe attachment on it, and the other one doesn't. So, when we took over operation of those machines, 10 years ago or so, we had to do a lot of permitting and some studies on them. One of those studies was fragmentation. Is it causing a bigger problem than it's helping? The goal of our aquatic plant management program for those two machines is the treatment of public high use public and publicly accessible private boat launches. So the theory is we want to take the weeds away from those high use areas. So we know we'll never be able to treat all the weeds in the Pond Array, but we want to try to prevent them from spreading to other area lakes. So we had to treat the high use publicly accessible boat launches, and those were the machines that were selected to do it. One of the things they asked me to do when we took over the program is say, okay, what is the effect of fragmentation? So I set up big seine nets on a massively dense 100-foot long shoreline that was just pretty much solid milfoil. And we set the nets up and let them fish for 24 or 48 hours so we could see what ambient auto-fragmentation is doing. Because milfoil especially, one way it seeds is it auto-fragments. It just sits out there when it's perfectly healthy, nobody's doing anything, it just breaks off and floats downstream. So we collected what ambient auto-fragmentation was on a 24-hour basis. And then we pulled those nets in, counted up the fragments, sent them off and did some fancy dry weight measurements. But then we put them right back out in the same spot and we harvested that 100-foot section in the middle. And obviously we're going to get more fragmentation from that because like you said, they don't collect it all. Especially the old machine, which was the tiller. It wasn't designed to scoop it up. The new machine is a lot more efficient at collecting what it cuts, but the way the paddle wheels work, you've always got one edge or the other that's getting pounded by the paddle wheel. So anyways, treated that with the machine, pulled it up, packed it in and said, okay, so is there net gain from treating this? And if you take the amount of auto-fragmentation that you get and add it to the number of days in a growing season, you get exponentially more fragmentation by just letting it grow out there in the water column and auto-fragment all year. So even though the machines do cause fragmentation right when they're treating, compared to leaving it in the water column, it's a huge net gain. So that's why we got our permit to continue running those machines. As far as the second part of your question goes, can you just cut it and leave it? I don't think that the blue book that you have to do your own shoreline management allows that. But if you're cutting it, it's not auto-fragmenting. So even if you're a poor manager and you leave it up to your neighbor to collect that all the time, it's still better for the environment and the river than if you don't cut it all. So it's a mixed bag. No, it's not legal to do that, but you're still better off if you do that than if you do nothing.
It sounds like you're recommending or condoning that just to cut it and let it be the downstream process is better than just leaving.
It's better than letting it just grow, right? But since I'm not a regulator, I can say that. But I would say that yeah, everybody's better off if you collect it because yeah, those are going to reseed without a doubt. Especially if you're doing and that's why I like the tillers because they get the roots, and if the roots aren't there, then you don't have that little bit. So if you're just using the cutter alone and you cut every day, those are little. And you're just, cutting and setting it. There's no really even a good way to break that up because the fragments aren't big enough for a rake to collect it. You have to have a net out there. Yes and no. There's benefits, there's drawbacks to both methods, but most of the bulk of it, by the time everybody pushes it off and around their dock, ends up at the dam, and we pull it out with our trash racks anyway. So, yeah.
So you have
We don't have a net for collecting fragments, no. But they do deploy a net, I believe, or at least they did initially, when they did the, what's the dredging called? Dash. When they did the dash. I don't know. Do they still deploy the net? Does anybody know? Okay. No, I don't think anybody uses the net. Either one. Yeah.
So, to cut the milfoil and ever throw it out of the river, it should always be at least raked off and let it dry in your bag. It doesn't smell. It's not a nuisance. That's, I think, how it should be properly portrayed here. Now, for PUD to go and harvest the stuff and just throw it out in the river, I mean, certainly you understand that that's spreading milfoil throughout the 50-mile reservoir because it goes right through it. We carry it to our docks and it just spreads, it just seeds.
Oh yeah, let me clarify. We do not harvest and then dump it out in the river. We take everything that we collect on our boats, and even with the old machine that doesn't have a bed that stores it, we pile it on the shoreline. We come back and we pitchfork it into trucks and we haul it away. So
there's a few commercial dashers out there, and I don't know, you can do whatever you want. There's a bunch of companies that do it. So
well, the commercial dashers that I know of don't like it in bags, and so.
Up here.
So this argument is perennial. And before you took over, it was discovered that this is an auto process. It's all part of auto fragmentation, that the rafts pull the rafts. It occurs in the spring with a water turnover. And so it has nothing to do with anybody's management. It's a natural process.
Okay, so to clarify, especially for the folks online, what Sharon said was they've looked at the raft formation before, and she said with the auto fragmentation, you get huge rafts without it being part of anybody's individual management. I mean, there's a whole lot of shoreline out there that's fragmenting all of the time, and that stuff naturally, like flotsam in the ocean, piles together, lumps up, and it travels in a big raft. So I can totally see that happen. I haven't done studies on that per se, but you can go as far upstream as you want, and there's still rafts, even though, right there at the bridge near Newport, there's no landowners up there that are coming out, but yet you still see smaller, but they're rafts coming down even at that point. So we get it from upstream, and it builds all the way through our system. But it's even, yes. And to restate what you said, I would always encourage everybody to pull up as much as you can, because even if you're trying to do a good job, you're still going to miss enough that there's going to be seeding. With the distribution of plants along our shoreline, the way it is now, you're more likely to get reseeded where you're treating than anywhere else, because there's veg cover. Pretty much 100% of where veg is going to grow, it's growing in our river right now. There's so much of it out there, it's unbelievable. So the real problem for fragmentation is mostly seen in your downstream neighbors who are also treating their shoreline. So just keep that in mind. The more we can pull out along the way, the better the whole river is going to be. Yeah.
Still, I pump in the river. Potable water, and I'm also next to a non-public boat launch. They used to have a deal we put out on our dock, don't you? What's happening now with the machines you have? They just come to this boat launch. It's not public, but do they just come and go ahead and sell it?
Well, I can't remember if we have any left that are private. We had several private high-use boat launches. But since then, they've changed management and they're no longer available for public access. So we aren't treating them anymore.
Ours is like the people think it is.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I'd have to know which one it is to know whether or not we treat Wilderness Estates.
Bridge.
Which bridge?
The orange.
Okay, the Orange Bridge. Yeah. Is that, I'm having a hard time. Is there another name for wilderness estates? Okay.
Okay, well, you know what the airport is?
Oh, yeah. Oh, on this side. Yeah. Gotcha. No, I don't think we treat that one.
Okay.
I haven't for as long as I've done it. Yeah, keep going. Yep. Right. Yeah. No, we haven't done that one since we took it over.
Okay, good.
One question in the back?
Yeah. Quick question on tools.
Yeah.
You didn't mention anything about blankets. I know that there's a new thing out there about the ones that actually billow, so that it allows decomp and gas and shit to go through.
Yeah.
Any experience with those?
I don't have any experience with the new one that you're talking about. That's basically an element that we needed to have for our river to work. But until you mentioned it, I didn't know there was a new product out on the market for that. So there's a lot of restrictions for putting ground barriers in the river because it's a navigable waterway and there's just a lot of permits that are associated around it. So one thing that I know is there is you've got to be able to manage it at least once every 3 years, pull the whole thing out, redeploy it. I always thought for ground barriers to work in our river, with the sedimentation that we get, because it's coming down constantly, whatever barrier you put down, you're going to have to remove it every year, or it's going to get too much sediment on it and you won't be able to pull it up. And then there's just debris under there that is going to be unmanageable. So
3 feet allows a billow in the middle of each of those sections.
Mm-hmm.
You're supposed to move it every 2 months.
Yeah, that seems like a great idea. I'd love it if somebody, block sunlight, tamps it down, and that would be a very effective measure, especially if you got good access to your shoreline and you can get out and access it. Yeah.
We've done barriers. Works extremely well. 100% effective and instantaneous. But the problem is getting them in is a challenge, depending on the steepness of the shoreline, and then getting back out because the sediment, it can be a challenge. But they are highly effective. But
I always thought setting something up with like semi-mud flaps. So you had a framework made out of maybe some PVC or something stronger, but they're negatively buoyant. So you put them out there, they're all, they'd only be attached on one edge. So as long as you could deploy it out further, drag it up a little bit, then you can pretty much just lift the outer frame and drop it back down. But that was just an idea I had. Never have seen anybody build anything like it. So they're built. Okay. Yeah.
Is the Ione boat launch treated? Question online.
I believe it's being treated today.
And then we just had someone comment to restate questions as they're.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, got another one. Yeah.
On the table 2 that you showed, out of like the native plants, 20 that were listed, probably you could bring that up. I mean, Eurasian milfoil and curly leaf pond were the only non-native plants other than the brush and but the ones that are in the water. So am I to understand that the other plants listed that are native to Washington are okay, healthy habitat, and that we're really not supposed to disturb those, and that's why your message would just treat what you need and kind of leave the rest because there's other benefits to fish and maybe shoreline management. Is that?
Yeah. So I'll restate the question. The question is, there were very few non-native or exotic weeds on the list that are provided here. Everything that's not highlighted pink is a native plant. So the question is, are we not supposed to treat the rest of them that aren't noxious weeds? And I think that this is detailed in the blue book a little bit, but basically there's a amount of space around your use area that you're allowed to clear any nuisance vegetation off of. So they could call it nuisance vegetation. that's native and non-native, basically anything that might tangle up in your feet or your boat props. I encourage people to leave as much of the other vegetation out there where they know they aren't going to be using that area, either to land and launch boats or swim on a regular basis, just because of the other benefits of having vegetation out there on the shoreline, and that's reduced erosion and to lock up nutrients that are too many nutrients out in the river.
Yeah. You want to mention the eco harvester?
I will let you mention the eco harvester. Yeah.
We have it.
It's always my fault. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, definitely. Before I hand it off, is there anybody else had another question? Yeah.
Various plants. I don't really see that. This one is 2015, but I don't know if it was a later version that I had, earlier version. It seemed like there was a reference. Short of that, is there a handout that we can get to where we can kind of take away and know how to identify what the oil looks like, if something else looks, maybe color that we can kind of use to guide?
So the resource I use is the internet. You can type in a common name, pops it up, and usually get way better information than anybody wants to pay to put into a color publication anymore. But there may be something out there. I will let you talk about that first and see if there is something.
I didn't hear the question.
Oh, is there, the Blue Book used to have plant ID information in it. It doesn't anymore. Is there a resource available for that now?
Well, we have several at the weed board as well. So we can.
And the state, not just the board, is working on creating a weed identification aquatic book.
Yeah.
Which will come in really
handy. Do you know, is that going to cover native veg too, or just noxious weeds?
I'm not sure.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
A really good book is Through the Looking Glass by New York State Federation of Lake Associations. Nice follow up. There's a lot of similar plants there, but it's a layman's guide and it has really good illustrations. So it's a good book to use.
Awesome. All right. So really quick, we do have one of our private contractors, local contractors here that has an eco harvester. So since we were kind of talking about that, we're going to go ahead and let him have a few minutes, and then we will go to break and then reconvene for the outside session at 11:15. And we will be doing that on Zoom. We'll have somebody out there with a phone on Zoom recording that. So everybody online will need to stay tuned, and I'll launch the next poll after that one right before lunch. You'll just need to stand over here for the online.
Thank you. My name is Gary Hedge, and my partner Jim Hassler here in the front row. We live at, have owned property at Chain Lake over in Elk, Washington. And several years ago, with encouragement from the weed board, I see Sharon here, Loretta, Mary, and Scott encourage us to purchase a eco harvester, and it's a pontoon boat the size of a regular 20-foot pontoon that allows us to pull weeds by the roots and then unload them on the shoreline. So for the last several years, we have used that successfully in the channel at our lake, Chain Lake, and harvested about 60 to 80 cubic yards of weeds just by driving over the weeds and pulling them out by the roots and unloading them on the shore that we use in the gardens because they make excellent compost. So with several years of experience under our belt, and we're about to get started again this year, we have approval for our lake, Chain Lake, and also the Pend Oreille River to use this. So we may have an interest sometime this year to help somebody with a private situation. We can launch the boat at a regular boat launch on the Pend Oreille, and then maybe pull weeds and drop them off on the shoreline for removal. So if that is of interest to anybody, you can contact me, Gary Hedge, Hedge, cell phone number 630-747-7410. You can go online on YouTube and look up ECO Harvester, Harvester, and there will be a video that shows the use of the boat. It's made in Wisconsin, and we were fortunate enough to find one here in the state of Washington, oddly enough on a mountaintop a few years ago, and have had good luck with it in our lake. So if that's of interest to anybody, you can look that up online. You can come over and see us work it at Chain Lake in the next few weeks, or we may even be able to arrange to try it somewhere along the Pend Oreille River. Thank you.